Welcome back to Blurred Summits. Today we are joined by Dr. Joshua Weiss. He is a conflict and negotiation expert and the co-founder of a negotiation program at Harvard University. Thank you so much for coming on today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So for those who might not know who you are, if you could describe yourself in one sentence, what would it be?
That's a good question. I guess I would say that I'm serious about my work, my profession, what I do with my career, but I'm not. But I don't take myself too seriously. Life is full of ups and downs, and you have to be able to laugh at yourself and kind of deal with life. So I would say that's probably about it. That's probably
that's awesome.
That's how my kids would describe me as well.
Nice. Yeah, I think being flexible is such an important life skill for people to have. And if you take yourself too seriously, then you don't really get to enjoy life.
That's right. I'm with you.
Yeah. So jumping on to your expertise in negotiation here, what are kind of the fundamentals of negotiation?
Yeah, there's a lot of popular misconceptions out there about what negotiation is, what you're supposed to do, all of those kinds of things. So one of the most important things that you can realize from a fundamentals point of view is that you have to be yourself. Oftentimes people say, oh, you have to fake it till you make it, or you never show your emotions, or you never do this. That's all baloney from where I come from. So you have to start by understanding yourself well and knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. But I mean, in general, your mindset matters a lot in negotiation. Often, there's an old saying: if you see every problem as a nail, you use a hammer. And the challenge in negotiation is that might be okay for negotiations where the relationship doesn't matter. But when you talk to people in business and in organizations and government, whatever, any realm where people are working, and you ask them about their negotiations, usually 80 to 90% of their negotiations tend to be with the same people over and over again, or at least with the same organizations over and over again. So if you take a win-lose approach to things, it typically doesn't come out well. And the reality is, in negotiation, it's an interdependent process. I need you to say yes for me to get what I want, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So it's really important that you go in with what I like to describe it as a problem-solving mindset, that you see the problem as the negotiation issue in front of you, and you need the other person to get where you want to go. So I think your mindset is really critical. And then another fundamental that is really, really important is understanding the difference between positions and interests. So positions are kind of what people say they want. Interests are why they want those things, why those things are so important in a negotiation. And if you can get down to those interests in most of your negotiations, you're going to end up not only reaching an agreement, but reaching a much better deal. Because, for example, if you were, I often get the question about negotiating salary, right? Well, when people ask me that and they say, well, how do I get a better deal? I say, well, the first thing I want you to do is not really think about the money. You're going to have a conversation about money. But what I want you to do is think about all the other things that are important to you when it comes to this particular job. Like, do they have flex time? Can you telecommute? Do they have kind of benefits they have, et cetera, et cetera? There are lots of things. What's the atmosphere? What's the organization like to work for? There are a lot of things that people care about and that people value. But we don't often go there when we're very positional in nature, when we're just thinking about, sort of, what is it I want? We don't explore all of the things of value. And that's really what makes, good negotiations great, is when you've maximized all the value there is to have in a given negotiation situation. So
I think that's really awesome. So jumping back on the interest part. So say in a negotiation, you're talking to someone, how can you figure out what their interests are? Like, how can you break them down to figure out what they're actually interests?
Yeah, well, part of it is, if you have a relationship with them or a level of trust with them, they're going to be much more likely to share that information with you, right? That this is what I really need in this particular situation. If you don't, then you have to go slowly, and you have to try to, ask questions in a way that isn't off-putting. Again, this isn't a competition. It's trying to figure out what's important to the other side. And I mean, I will often say to the other, look, if you let me know what's important to you here, I'll do my best to see if I can make that happen. But unless I know what matters to you, um, then I can't do that. And in a lot of negotiations, people hold their cards very close to their vest. They don't want to share information. But the reality is, if you're going to reach a good deal or a great deal, it comes down to sharing information. And you want to be hard on the problem, like you want to be really clear with what it is that you're trying to achieve in a negotiation, but not hard on the person, because you need them. You need them to say
Mm-hmm.
yes. And that's one of the big mistakes I see people make, is they think that they have to beat the other person up to get where they want to go, and they don't, and it doesn't work that way. And even when you do beat somebody up, or you know get a great deal, you're not going to have many negotiations, because your reputation gets around. I've worked with lots of people in different industries who say to me, I used to really beat people up in negotiation, and now I realize that I've lost a ton of business as a result of that. And so it doesn't really help you. What helps you is building a relationship as you negotiate. You have a short-term goal in your negotiations, which is to achieve X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have a long-term view, which is that you need the other person. You're going to want to work with them. There's an old saying that your best new customer is your current one, and how you treat them, how you deal with them matters. And it's a source of strength if you can negotiate in a way where you both come away getting to what it is that you wanted, because then down the road, when you sit down to negotiate again, it's not going to be a competition or a pissing match. It's going to be, hey, we both have an interest here in reaching an agreement. Let's talk about what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting. And so would these same sort of skills be utilized when it comes to conflict resolution as well? Or is it a sort of different skill set that's required?
No, I really don't think so. I mean, I got my PhD in conflict analysis and resolution, but I today focus a lot of my attention on negotiation, and the difference is really level of the depth at which you go. In some of your negotiations, there are certain skills. For example, there's a book, a famous negotiation book called Getting to Yes, that lays out all this idea of positions and interests. And when I'm dealing with a conflict, I'm looking for those things. But when it comes to conflict resolution, sometimes you have to go a little deeper, because it goes to people's identities and who they are, if they are embarrassed, if they have lost face or something like that. You've got to get to that level. And so sometimes it's digging a little deeper when you're trying to solve a conflict. But from my point of view, I really think that the skills are quite similar, and you may have to be a little more attuned to some of the psychological dimensions, or other elements of if you've got a pretty destructive conflict. Usually the personal piece is something that comes into play, and while it does so in negotiation as well, it's not as dramatic as it is when there's a difficult conflict to be dealt with.
I guess, yeah, it's good to know that you can sort of use the similar skill sets and be quite versatile in those situations there. And how can university students specifically, since that's kind of our main audience for the podcast here, how can university students use these skills of negotiation and conflict resolution to, say, maybe negotiate a better mark on one of their papers? Say they maybe feel they're short a couple of marks here or there, or just in their day-to-day lives. How can they take advantage of these and make the most of it?
Well, first of all, let me just say that, to me, negotiation is not just something that salespeople do, or people in procurement, or diplomats. It's something that everybody does all day long. And I have 2 kids in college, and they're tired of hearing me say that, but they have come to realize that I'm not wrong. In general, I think if you can see all of your interactions where you're trying to achieve something, or you're trying to solve a problem, if you get a problem with your roommate, you're negotiating. But if you're trying to achieve something, again, like in my mind, once you start down that conversation of having that conversation, you're now negotiating. So if you want to approach your professor about, a grade that you've got, and perhaps you don't agree with it, well, okay. You need to start by thinking about, well, let me put myself in the shoes of the professor. What does he think? Why, etc. And then what's going to be persuasive to him or her in terms of changing their mind, right? And one of the classic problems is that people tend to view negotiation and focus very much on themselves. when it comes to negotiation, and they don't give it nearly enough thought in the preparation phase to the other. Like the other person is the one you're trying to influence. So you need to think like them. What do you know about this professor? What kind of relationship do you have with them? Um, and how do you draw on that? So, I would just say that, learning the skills of negotiation will help you in every facet of life. You're going to use them in your working life, but you also use them, at home in your personal life, and you have, eventually, if you get married and have kids, and or with your parents, or whomever. Um, some of my most interesting and challenging negotiations are with my family, and it's really important that you do negotiate with your family, because too often, one of the problems is we say things to our family, and in particular, we say them in certain ways that we wouldn't say to anybody else because they're close to us and we know they'll always be there for us. But that can also be really destructive and unhelpful. And so, when you're dealing with your brothers and sisters and whomever, you've got to think about how you're going to frame conversations and things along those lines. And then in the world around you, I mean, if you go to buy a car or a house, or you're trying to deal with a credit card bill, or you deal with an airline on a canceled flight. I mean, it's all over the place. And I think, like I said, I think the more that you can learn these skills, the better off you're going to be. And there's just an amazing amount of wonderful books out there that could teach people the skills of negotiation. But you got to practice, and you got to be the real challenge is most people do what I call they intuit their way through it. In other words, they just make things up as they go, and they don't prepare, which is really a classic mistake. If you don't prepare, you're preparing to fail, from my point of view. And so a lot of time needs to be put into, okay, we're going to this negotiation. Like, how do I prepare for this? What do I know? What do I need to know? What kind of research can I do? It's a little bit for, since you guys are in the university, you'll understand this. Like when you walk into a room and you have an exam, if you've studied, you're not worried. But if you haven't, you are, and you have every reason to be worried. And negotiation is the same thing. If you've done your preparation, and to me, a big chunk of negotiation is preparation. And it's not, by the way, I wouldn't want you to walk in with a plan, because Dwight Eisenhower, former US president, said plans are useless, but planning is everything. And what he meant was that, a plan is typically designed for a very stable landscape where you do A, B, and C, and you get to D. That's not negotiation. Negotiation is an unpredictable landscape. We have something called the 80-20 rule that we use, which is that you can know about 80% of what's going to come up in a negotiation, what's going to transpire and things like that. And there's 20% that you're not going to know until you sit down and you start having your conversation. So it requires some adaptability, some flexibility, but it also requires sort of contingency planning and thinking that way. And so, what I typically do is I'll say, okay, so my goal is X, and let me try to think of what are the different ways that I can get there, so that if one road is blocked, I've got another one in mind that I can go down. And it's that way of thinking that I think is most helpful when it comes to negotiation.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And so that last 20%, is that 20% the one that you kind of need the experience of going through lots of negotiations to sort of understand what to expect? Or is it something that you can kind of be always prepared for?
Well, I mean, it's really sort of preparing for the unprepared in one sense. It's going in and knowing, what, I know a good chunk of what I need to know here, but I'm open to the notion, and I'm going to remain open to the notion that there's some stuff in here that I don't know that I'm going to learn as we go through this negotiation. Like people will reveal some interest as you go if you stay at the table, and you keep talking to them about different things. And that's the stuff that you don't know. What I would say by way of experience is that you come to realize that, and you come to be comfortable with a little bit of incomplete information. I mean, that's the one thing. Every negotiation has some incomplete information that you don't know. And as a result, you have to go in saying, okay, like, I know there's things in here I don't know, and I'm going to be prepared. So when they come up, I'm not going to freak out. I'm just going to say, all right, what do I do with this new information? And sometimes, when something like that does come up, it's valuable to, even say, could I just take a couple minutes to think about, where we are, or just step away from the table for a couple minutes, because sometimes you're thrown for a little bit of a loop and you need to gain your composure again. And so sometimes just stepping away can be quite helpful.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I think a lot of people too, that fear of the unknown is something that holds everyone, I guess, so strong. And I guess understanding that that's inevitable will help make those situations just that little bit easier and learning to deal with that stuff.
That's
So
exactly right.
in negotiations, I guess, especially things like at home with your family or at university with your teachers, you
Hmm.
don't want to piss them off and upset them in these negotiations.
Right.
So how can you go about negotiations where both sides are able to walk away happy? Is it something that is really manageable in all negotiations, or are there somewhere that's just not never possible?
Yeah, look, sometimes you run into people who are difficult and aren't really that interested in negotiating, which is why you always have to understand what your alternative to a negotiation is. We call that your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And no, look, I believe that if people come into a negotiation with the right mindset, they can often do quite well and they can do better than they imagine and they expect. Again, the most one of the most important things I think you can do is not see the other person as an adversary, because you need them.
Mhm.
And so, if you're dealing with someone that's difficult, that's problematic, you got to let them know that you're not prepared to, to, I mean, I've had people who have tried all kinds of dirty tricks and other kinds of things. And I'll be very clear with them. A, I know what you're doing. And B, I'm not interested. And if you want to keep going down this road, then we can stop now. But I am interested in, working with you if you're going to take a different approach to things. You have to be willing to walk away sometimes to send a signal that, like, this approach to negotiation is not really what I'm interested in. And I'm not interested in playing games. And the thing about dirty tricks is that if you know about them, if you're a kind of seasoned negotiator, they don't work, because we've seen them all before. They only work on people who don't know what they're doing. Um, so I mean, and I've had people say to me, well, that's your problem. When you figure it out, let me know. And I say, that's actually not really how this works. Like, if it's my problem, it's yours, because
Mhm.
you're not going to get what you want either, because I'm not saying yes. Right.
Yeah.
So again, it's back to preparation. It's back to understanding and being knowledgeable about negotiation. When you're strategic in your approach, um, it's hard to have people knock you off your game when you know what you're doing.
Is there a way for new negotiators to understand what those dirty little tricks are, or is it something that you just have to go through it and then after the fact reflect back on it and realize that you got kind of taken advantage of?
No, I absolutely, you can learn about them. I mean, all you have to do is Google dirty tricks in negotiation, and you'll get a laundry list of them. And like I said, once you know the good cop, bad cop notion, or the split the difference swindle, which really is a simple idea, but people fall prey to it all the time. And just as a quick example, imagine if you were selling something on eBay, right? And
Mhm.
you had it listed for, or Facebook Marketplace or whatever, and you had it listed for $100, and somebody offered you 50, and you said, well, I'll come down to 80, and they come up to 60. And so you're at 80 and 60, and they say, why don't we just split the difference? You see the problem with that, right? Which is that I came down to 80 right away, and they only came up to 60.
Yeah.
So it's not a fair split, and you have to be careful. That's why there's so many of these tricks that are psychological in nature. They're trying to get you to think that what's happening is reasonable or a good deal, right? So all of those things can be learned. Like I said, they're no secret, and that's the great thing about the internet, is all of this information, which used to be hidden and used to be um, kept from consumers and things like that, is now out there in the marketplace. And there's been no better place than to see that than in car buying negotiations, because now all the information that the car dealers had, we have as consumers.
Mhm.
And it's a question of doing your homework, and again, knowing what you're doing and being able to say, well, in the research that I've done, here's the value of the car. Talk me out of it. Tell me why it's different. And usually they can't. That's the problem, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So again, it's back to preparation, and it's back to being strategic. In a lot of the trainings that I do with companies and organizations, people inevitably come up to me and say, I don't know if you told me anything I don't already do. But what you did tell me was how to do it much more strategically. And that's a huge difference as opposed to just trying to figure out your way through it. It's really being thoughtful and strategic. And, look, in any job, you tend to use a strategic approach to things, right? And
Mhm.
negotiation is a really important part of your job. It will be down the road for all of you. And you're going to be negotiating up with your boss and down with people who work for you, right, to keep you on board. You're going to be
Mhm.
negotiating with colleagues on group work projects and things like that, as well as, with external companies and organizations. So it's something you do all the time, and you got to understand it. And there's a lot of research and a lot of studies that talk about how the key to success are what are often called the relational transferable skills, which really means the ability to deal with people effectively. Um, I teach quite a bit, and my students who are graduate students all say to me, I'm good at what I do. It's just dealing with people is the challenge, and I get it. I mean, but that's where negotiation and leadership and conflict resolution, all those things come in handy.
Yeah, so I guess in those situations where you are dealing with, say, someone who's being a bit difficult, they're getting on your
Uh,
nerves, seeming like they're being kind of stubborn for absolutely no reason, how can someone make sure they keep their emotions in check so they kind of don't get blinded by anger or things like that to make sure that they end up getting to the right resolution?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and look, emotions are what make negotiation and dealing with conflict and all these things difficult, right? But here's the reality, and here's another big mistake that people make, which is that they try to keep emotions out, and when they do, um, or when they try to suppress them, they usually come back in a very unproductive and unhelpful way. So you have to manage them, as you've alluded to, right? Um, so we have a technique. First of all, so one thing is to just embrace the notion that your emotions are going to play a role, right? Don't try to dismiss them, but recognize it's going to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Then we have a concept that we call going to the balcony, which means that you kind of, when you feel your emotions are getting the better of you and you want to say that thing that's going to make you feel better, but is going to set you back and make the process that much more challenging, better to step away and take a break from the negotiation and say, you know what, I think I just need to get a coffee and think about where we're going with this, or I need a bio break, whatever. Pick your reason for needing to step away, and that's when you need to kind of do a little bit of emotional intelligence management, right? Which is managing yourself. And I would encourage folks, if you're serious about negotiation, wanting to get better at this and learn about it, you have to learn emotional intelligence, which is about not only managing yourself and being aware of the challenges, the things that trigger you, right? If somebody's really condescending, that's one of my triggers. When somebody is that, I know I'm going to get triggered, and so I know I need to be thinking I got to step away here for a minute and consider what to do. But you also have to recognize in the other person what's going on, as well as the relationship between you. um, so it can be done. It really requires, the balcony is a nice little skill to utilize when you're up against it and you're feeling like you're about ready to tell the person what they can do with themselves, um, right? But then the longer kind of general notion is learning to become emotionally intelligent. And everybody can learn that. It's not easy to do well, um, but if you do it well, then you're going to be much more inclined to manage yourself more effectively. And look, I often say to my kids, that person didn't make you angry, you allowed yourself to become angry. And I'm sure your listeners will be like, oh my god, my parents say that and I hate when they say that. But the reality is that you do have the ability to control yourself.
Mhm.
And in negotiation, the best negotiators are those people who have learned how to manage themselves very effectively. So I don't care what you do to me. You're not going to get me away from my game, and you're not going to, push me down a road that I don't want to go, because I've been down these roads many times before, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the heart of it. But it takes time and effort, and it does take some experience. When you start out, you'll notice, oh, the emotional side of this is pretty tough, and then the more you do it, the better you get. The more you realize that you can do this, um, as long as you do pay attention to the emotions and not just the logical pieces of things.
Yeah, I think that balcony technique is something that, at least me personally, probably should use more.
Hmm.
I always find it difficult to walk away in the middle of I guess, any negotiation there. Saying,
Yeah,
I need a second. I guess it's just being conscious about myself and being aware of the situation around me, saying, okay, I can take the moment, calm down, reset. So
right.
say there's a situation where someone doesn't necessarily have that time to go step away. Is there something they can do like within themselves? Anything they can do in the moment to kind of cool
Sure.
themselves down?
Yeah, of course. Well, if you understand the physiology of the human body, not to get too technical on you, but when you get triggered, right, when your emotions start to race, you get in fight or flight mode, right? And I don't know if you know what happens to the blood in your body or fight or fight mode, but basically what happens is it rushes to your core and then to your hands and your feet. So you either can fight or flee, right? The
Yeah.
problem with that is what? Well, it's pretty obvious, right? There's no oxygen rushing to your brain, which carries
Hmm.
blood and or blood carrying oxygen to your brain. So you're not thinking clearly, right? So if
Yeah.
anybody's ever said to you, I don't know why I said that, they're not lying. They were in a heightened emotional state where there was nothing going on upstairs,
Hmm.
right? So think of professional athletes. Okay, notice you got a soccer shirt on there, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one of the techniques the professional athletes do is deep breathing. And the point of doing that is they are in fight or flight mode in that moment, and so what they're doing is they are taking deep breaths to redistribute the oxygen through their body so they can calm down and focus on what they need to do, right? It's the same thing in
Okay.
negotiation.
Hmm.
So a couple deep breaths, but even to say to somebody, if somebody says, no, you can't take a break, well, I would ask why you're sitting with this person, but b um, just say, all right, well, give me 1 second. And oftentimes I'll just sit there silently. Like, we don't use silence enough.
Hmm.
I used to have a colleague who would just sit there and people would be like, are you okay? He's like, I'm fine, I'm just thinking, right? So
Yeah.
again, it's all about, do what's comfortable for you, have those tools and techniques so you recognize it. And um, I mean, I've had someone, I've said to somebody, I need to take a break, and they said, well, no, we're not taking a break, we're going to finish this conversation. I said, no, like, no, I'm not having this conversation right now, because it's not
Hmm.
going to end well if we do, and my goal is to try to make this end well. So, it's appropriately pushing back. There's a difference between, to me, what you want to do is be assertive in negotiation, not aggressive, and there's a difference. And my
Okay.
colleague William Ury, who's a well-known negotiation uh, scholar, describes it this way. He says that when you're assertive, you stand on your own 2 feet. When you're aggressive, you stand on somebody else's toes, and there's a very big
Hmm.
difference. And you want to be assertive in negotiation. It's a core skill to be assertive as well as empathic, as well as understanding of the other,
Hmm.
right? Um, but if you're not assertive and if you don't, um, push for what's important to you, then you become accommodating and you never get what you
Yeah.
want and you're never happy. So you have to, but it's not a question of, again, of beating the other person up. It's just saying, look, here's what I need to get out of this negotiation. I'm sure there's something that you need to as well. Happy to consider it. Let's think creatively about what that looks like.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah. No, that is amazing there. Yeah. I think taking that moment, even if they don't allow it, I guess it's definitely a red flag when they're saying, "Hey, no, you can't go." They're wanting something from you and act rash or get that win out of
Mhm.
that. So, kind of jumping off that, how can someone who's in a perceived position with a lack of power kind of drive a negotiation in a direction? I know this summer I was trying to negotiate with people that were 20 years older than me, and it seemed quite difficult in the moment. So, just wondering how you can really control it, being that person kind of on the lower rung.
Well, I mean, I think in your case, you have to step back and ask, why is this difficult? What, is it the messenger? Are they not listening to because I'm young? Are they what? What's going on here, and how do I figure
Hmm.
that out,
Yeah.
right? And that might be why you talk to somebody who's in the organization and say, I notice when I'm trying to bring things up, people aren't really paying attention. Like, do you have any insight for me as to what's going on
Hmm.
there? I mean, in general, when we're talking about power and negotiation, your best sort of power is your alternatives, meaning your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so, and that is an acronym that stands for BATNA. And your BATNA is, what are you going to do if you don't reach agreement in your negotiation, in this particular negotiation? What do you do then?
Yeah.
Right. So I think in your case, asking yourself, well, if these people don't listen to me, or they aren't taking in the information, or they're not doing what I would like them to do, what do I do? Can I go somewhere else? Can I go to their boss? Can I do whatever? Right now, you have to be careful with something like that, because obviously you can burn some bridges and things like that. But it's really important, particularly when you're at a power asymmetry and you have less power. It's really important to understand your BATNA. Okay, so what can I do?
Okay.
And on the flip side, you also want to understand the BATNA of the other, because what happens is we typically overestimate people who have more power than us. We overestimate their BATNA. We think they're,
Okay.
that they can do whatever they want. And yet, let's imagine you decided, hey, this doesn't work, I'm going to quit. Okay. And again, I'm just giving a hypothetical. Maybe you don't want to quit, but your ability to walk away from some of these things would send a signal that, that you're serious, and that, you want them to take you seriously. The other tool that I use a lot when I don't have power is framing the agenda. So I try to take control of the conversation from the beginning and try to frame it the way I want. And that's often a very effective technique when you don't have powers, to say, hey, here are the things I'd like to talk about. And hopefully the more powerful party will go with it. And you've thought about how you can structure a conversation or the negotiation in a way that benefits you and helps you to achieve your objective.
Yeah, I think, I guess controlling it up front with that, setting the agenda, makes a lot of sense, because I know oftentimes I come in with maybe one point and then it would carry on to a lot more. And then at that point, they're kind of driving it, so I'm on my back foot. But if I come in with everything kind of presented up front, they kind of have to go with what I say, and then I can kind of be the one running it in the direction I kind of want to.
Yep.
Yeah, so we end off every episode with kind of the same question. So say that you're going on this hike, and the summit of this hike is the peak of all your life's achievements. You could bring things on this hike, like hiking poles, hiking boots, snacks, things like that, to kind of help aid you on that journey. So now say that journey is your life. What 3 characteristics, traits, tools would you bring on you to reach this summit?
Okay. Well, I think the first one is patience. And just from the point of view of negotiation, dealing with conflict, patience is a critical element to this process. Often people want to rush through, they don't give thought, they don't take their time. So I would certainly say patience, and patience leads to being thoughtful and taking in information around you and things like that. When you're hiking, there's a lot going on, right? And you have to know your environment and things along those lines. And I think patience helps with that. The second thing I would certainly say is resilience, and so sort of resilience / persistence. Often when I talk to people who negotiate, I'll ask them what they did. And they say, well, I made an offer and they, rejected it. And so it was hopeless. And I said, well, you didn't negotiate. Like, the best negotiators that I know that I work with, they are persistent. They are resilient. If one avenue is blocked, they go down another. They have another way to get to the same goal, etc. So they don't take no for an answer. They flip a problem 6 different ways until they find the right way to see it and to view it from both perspectives. And then I think the third one is understanding the power and the value of relationships. A few years ago, one of my daughters said to me, you seem to have done okay in life. Like, what would you attribute that to? And I said, I understand and I value and I invest in relationships. So, in so many instances, I will take meetings when I don't know people. And I will do things just because to me, that's how you live your life. And I can't tell you how many times, the investment in relationships has come back to help me, and in very unexpected ways, in a negotiation where somebody will say, you may not know this, but you helped a friend of mine 6 years ago to do this. And so that's why we contacted you, right? And I had no idea, right? So I think those 3 are a very powerful combination, no matter what field you're in or what industry you're in. And frankly, I think we live in a world where people are less patient than they used to be. And I think we need more of that. I think that people are also not always resilient. They don't invest in that. They don't understand that when you get knocked down, you have to get back up.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes I feel like relationships are just, people don't grasp the importance of them and why they matter so much. But
Mm-hmm.
they say a lot about who you are as a person and how you treat others. I always believed is, you have to treat people the way you want to be treated. And when you do that, and you live your life that way, and you engage in your career that way, you will reach the summit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So patience, resilience, and the power of friendships. Those are some really amazing traits that I think really, if you have those three things, you're setting yourself up for success to get on that hike, that journey to your summit. Well, Dr. Weiss, thank you so much for coming on to today's podcast. Really appreciated your time and all the insight that you had on negotiation and how students can really use it in their day-to-day lives. So thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode of Blurred Summits. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, or follow on whatever platform you're listening on. And new episodes are live every Sunday. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you guys next time.